as well. Evening everyone, and welcome to the Audit Risk Committee for Wednesday the 31st of January 2024. Just a brief announcement before we begin. This is a meeting of the Council held in public. It is not a public meeting. There is no fire drill planned, so if the fire alarm sounds, please leave by the exit nearest the large screen at the front of the room and proceed down the fire exit to the courtyard. Once it is safe to return, councillors receive a text message. Officers will also advise when it is safe to return to the meeting. We are recording the meeting this evening using our webcasting system. The webcast will be transmitted live and will also be available on the council's website following the meeting. All mobile devices should be switched off or set to silent so that the meeting is not interrupted by ringtones. So off with that, we'll move on to the first item. Any apologies for absence? I've had apologies from Councillor Luke McKenzie. Any more? No, we're all here. Next item is any declarations of interest? No? Just can I have a confirmation vote on the previous minutes for the committee? Or any abstentions? Yep. Okay.
Is that for both the 5th and the 12th? Sorry, for November, 5th December and 29th November, yeah?
I'll take them in block.
Lovely,
yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, that moves us on to the main business, and the first item is a verbal update from the external auditor. So, Steve, if you could.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of a progress update on the 2020-21 financial statements audit, at the last audit committee, or audit risk committee, we indicated that we felt that the audit would be completed by March 24. We subsequently confirmed that, Councillor Canham, to you in writing via Julian Frost. I see no reason at this stage to revise that date, and that's the date that we are still working to. There's no further updates I'll give in relation to that particular audit, but happy to answer any questions that members might have on that. In terms of maybe just give a quick update in terms of where things are on backstop dates, which I appreciate we've spoken before at this committee. As I understand it, as there isn't yet a consultation on a revised Code of Audit Practice and legislation that would bring in backstop dates. Our understanding is that consultations will be launched fairly soon by DLUC and Department for Levelling Up and the National Audit Office. And that will, those proposals will include initial backstop dates for local authorities and auditors of 30th of September 24. So that will cover all outstanding audits up to and including the 22-23 year. As I say, we haven't yet seen a detailed consultation on that, but our understanding is that what that consultation will do or seek to do is, as I say, draw a line or draw those audits to a close by the 30th of September 24. So for any audits that haven't started or are in progress at that date, they would either need to be qualified through a limitation of scope if there was elements that auditors were able to give assurance on, or if audits were incomplete or hadn't been started, it is likely that they would then have a disclaimed audit opinion. We understand that there will be different arrangements for value for money conclusions or conclusion. So again, our understanding is that for any open year, there would be a single value for money conclusion that would be given covering the whole period of open years. So for example, if there was 2 years of audit open, there would be a value for money conclusion that would cover both years rather than two separate conclusions or two separate auditors' annual reports. As I say, our understanding is that the consultation around that will be launched fairly soon, but that's as much as I can update you on at the moment. Happy to take any questions on that.
Thanks for that update, Steve. It's quite interesting. I think one thing you didn't mention was the subsidy claims. Is that included in any of this, or will you still have to do each year, to get us up to date individually on those?
So there's no backstop dates for housing benefit subsidy claims. So where things are currently, every year of the subsidy claim would need to be audited and certified by an auditor.
So you're obviously sticking to the dates that we discussed in the meeting with the partner, Julian. So we've obviously got 2 months to, or less really, if we're going to have the reports in time for the committee. Do you envisage you've got enough time to get that done and meet that deadline?
Yes, I'm not proposing to change that date at all at the moment. If anything happens that we need to, then we'll obviously communicate again in writing with you. But at this stage, there's nothing to indicate that will be necessary.
And then obviously that leaves a few years to get complete. If by the 30th of September you have to, or you close off and get everything done, presumably you're not going to start a full audit on items that, if you get this one done, that we're trying to get finished. So what sort of work do you think there would be around those outstanding years, and how quickly do you think you'd get that done to get up, meet that deadline?
So in terms of the whatever the opinion might be on the financial statements, even if it is a disclaimed audit opinion, there is still a certain amount of work that an auditor has to do to be in a position to give that disclaimed audit opinion. So we are planning to resource that work over the summer, but we don't yet know exactly how much that work will be. We're still waiting for some additional. The Code of Audit Practice will hopefully provide some clarity on that. The other piece of work, as I say, that we are gearing ourselves up to do will be that we will have to give an auditor's annual report for those. If we assume it's 2 years, there will be an auditor's annual report that will cover both of those years, and that piece of work will need to be done. So again, we are planning resources to make sure that's done, so that both those pieces of work can be done to give whatever opinion we give on the financial statements and to issue that auditor's annual report.
And just finally then, before I bring Owen in, but what I would say is, when are you going to start communications? Obviously, we can't expect this to happen, so when would you start communications with Owen and his team here to make sure that Owen's got the resource around for when you need to communicate together?
So within the next few weeks, I think the key thing is to have the actual consultation, so that we do know what the dates are and what the proposals are. But as soon as that's out, we will start communicating with Owen on what our plans are to meet that.
The sooner we can start looking at it to prepare, the better, I guess. But yeah, I'll bring Owen in to comment.
It's really along those lines, Chair. Obviously, as a council, we welcome hopefully getting the 2021 audit signed off by March, which would be a good step forward for us. We obviously welcome getting a resolution to that backlog. Obviously, the detail is going to be very important for us to understand what that involves, the times for how that's going to work. And we just flagged to the committee, it's going to be very challenging working with Steve and his team. Obviously, over the summer, as you know, we've got some new staff, and it's going to be difficult, obviously, juggling that with holidays and the like. So we will need to work very carefully with Steve to make sure we can do that. And it's going to be challenging. Obviously, we'll endeavour to get over the line, but it is reassuring that that's coming to a head, which hopefully we'll be able to then put that behind us and then look forward to the more current years, which offer that much more value to yourselves and to residents.
Yeah, thanks for that, Owen. Yeah, that's definitely encouraging that there seems to be movement and a way forward, so that gives everyone a new lease of life in, and make sure their work actually counts going forward. Yeah, so that'd be interesting. Any other comments out there on this item? Yeah, Councillor Allen.
Yeah, just going back. So the years 21 to 22, and 22 to 23, you're going to finish this September. 24. Yeah.
So, if assuming the consultation that we're expecting has a backstop date of 30th September 24, yes, those audits would be completed. However, I think it's fair to say that it will not be the clean full audit opinion that you would normally get. It will be it's likely to be a disclaimed audit opinion, but I think we need to see what the consultation says.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks for that update. It's a very important one. So with no further comments on this one, we'll move on to item 5, which is the internal audit and counter fraud progress update report. So call for Mike to update.
Thank you very much, Chair. If I can ask members to turn to pages 19 and 20 of the agenda pack. So in terms of progress against the audit plan 23-24, provided is a copy of the audit plan and progress against each of the audits in terms of where we're at, draft report, final report, planning, testing, etc. Since the last meeting of this committee back in November, we've completed one further audit review. That was a light touch review of the procurement team, procurement function, in terms of how that function supports service departments through development of strategies and policies and training provided to officers. Also, we looked at the work of the team in terms of the monitoring arrangements, compliance arrangements, in terms of how it monitors spend, procurement activity, to confirm compliance with the procurement rules. And basically, the direction of travel was quite good. So basically, we're quite happy with the work of that team. If I can now direct members to page 25, in terms of performance of service areas in implementing audit recommendations. At the time of going to report, we had a total of 54 live recommendations on Pentana, of which 32, which is 59%, were considered to be overdue and requiring immediate action by management. Of the 32 overdue audit recommendations, 7 were classified as major priority, 18 as moderate, and 7 as low priority. So if I can turn my attention to those 7 classified as major priority, 3 relate to information governance. 2 of those are basically at 95%, where internal audit essentially pushed them back from 100% because we were awaiting evidence. So until such times we get evidence, we won't mark those as complete. As far as the service department is concerned, they are completed, but we haven't had the evidence. Obviously, being internal audit, we like to see evidence before we mark them off as verified. 4 relate to payroll deductions. 1 of those is now complete and has been signed off. The other 3 were awaiting a report from our tax consultants, and it is hoped following a receipt of that report we'll be able to mark off the other 3 outstanding recommendations. So we're hopeful that once we get that report, those 4 major recommendations outstanding of payroll will be addressed. So lastly, if I can direct members to the work of the counter fraud team. So as always, the work of the fraud team is progressing quite well in terms of the number of referrals received. To date, we've received 422 new referrals. 119 is still under investigation. And you can see in terms of cashable savings, we're generating around £85,000 worth of cashable savings and £905,000 worth of non-cashable savings. What's more important to note is the number of properties recovered. So we've recovered 3 council properties that were illegally sublet. We also get involved in right to buy cases, and we've basically stopped or prevented 6 right to buy cases. And we also look at housing applications, and to date we've managed to stop 11 wrongful housing applications. So in terms of the work of the team, I'm quite happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Mike. That's a great report again, and yes, some very good work in there. So you obviously mentioned the progress on the major recommendations, and I know we've got the February working group coming up shortly, and we're going to be reviewing the progress made with the variations to pay limited audit and the employment tax limited audit. So I think by the time we get to the working group, hopefully we should have the report from the consultants to let us know where we are. So we should be able to, like you say, sign off those major recommendations. Again, you mentioned the counter fraud team, and yeah, it's really pleasing to see that there's, in quarter three, there's another 4 properties that have been defended one way or another. We all know the issues with housing pressures at the moment, so it's very good to keep that resource available to the public. So yeah, congratulations to the team on good work. On page 27, 28, where you talk about the procurement audit that you've done, it's extremely encouraging to hear that things are moving in the right direction. So I'm really pleased to hear that, and we're turning to actually attention to monitoring the contracts and the management of the contracts. I know that's a particularly a key or a bugbear for mine is with the landscaping contract, where we've had some low quality scores. It's essential that we make sure council gets recompense where it's in the contract. So contracts performance is definitely key, and which basically ensures that we get value for money. So it's encouraging to hear that we're moving on in that direction. So before I ramble on, is there any questions out there? So Councillor Karen Neeson.
One is regarding the waste strategy review. I noticed that it's been put into 24-25. When abouts in 24-25 are we going to get a report? And would it not be possible to have an interim report on where we are now?
In terms of the overall waste strategy, we've deferred it because obviously it's not complete. There's still another element of the strategy to be worked on. And in terms of the following year, we're probably going to focus on not the whole overall waste strategy itself, but particular elements of how they're actually gone in terms of like areas such as miscollections and complaints. And we'll also probably look at how the new in-cam technology that's on the radar will help miscollections and improve the overall performance management of that service area. The strategy itself is quite a behemoth in terms of its size, so I don't think we could audit all of it. But so we're going to look at the key elements of the waste strategy and how they progress. So probably towards the latter part of next year, Q3, probably quarter three, when all the new arrangements had a chance to bed in, we'll bring a couple of reports. So we'll be looking at, as I say, miscollections and complaints, and then we'll look at later part of the year in-cab technology and how that's improved the waste strategy. So that's what we're proposing. But we will bring a copy of the audit plan for the next year to this committee in March. So if there's other particular areas that committee feel we warrant examination, then we can include those in the plan. But rather than look at the whole waste strategy, which is quite a large exercise, and we only have a finite number of audit resources, I can't really spare 100 days to look at that. So we're going to look at what are the key risks for the service and focusing in on those.
Yeah, so let me just come in on the back of that. So I think from the audit and risk point of view, like what Mike said, we need to look at the processes that are in place with the current strategy, and if they're being implemented correctly and adhered to, like what Mike was saying with the complaints and miscollections. I think we just have to be careful that we don't stray into the policy of it. So the policy will be for the scrutiny committees to look at. What we'll look at is the current policy that's in place and how are we adhering to that. Whether it's a suitable policy, that'll be down for scrutiny to pick up. No. Yeah, just setting the expectation there, because I mean I did look at that one myself, but I think the waste improvements. Use that, the waste strategy changes. They were implemented a little bit later than I think what we envisaged originally. So it's quite sensible to move that audit later on into next year. So carry on with your questions.
Yeah. The second one is on rents. I noticed that we have two issues in the major column. I just wondered what they were.
I don't have that information to hand. I would have to come back to you to actually unpick those and see what they recommendations they relate
If you
to.
would, please, I'd be grateful. Thank you. And then, what was the other one?
I mean, it's just pointed out to me actually they are included at Appendix C,
Page 31.
page 31.
While you search for your next question, let me just bring Councillor Morris in.
Can I just say, you mentioned earlier on that there were 6 housing applications to buy, which you ruled out, we'd bit through. Now, did any of that lead to prosecution or?
I haven't left the prosecution, but we would look at the application and then basically take a view on whether they warrant criminal action. So if we believe there's fraud or criminal action, they're being stopped because they didn't meet certain criteria. So yeah, but didn't warrant prosecution as such.
Any more, Councillor? No. Karen Easton?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was around procurement, actually, sorry. One of the issues that we've picked up on is that the contracts are coming to the various committees very late, so that committees are sort of being forced to take sort of immediate action and sort of interim action rather than having the time to actually deliberate the process properly, if that makes sense. Probably doesn't, but...
So, right, Councillor?
Part of the work Mike would have done would be looking at the new contract procedures and the way the framework works now. So what we do, we have the contract pipeline that's published every year. It'll be published again in the new year. What that does, that goes to the scrutiny committees, who then will look at potential contracts they want to review in more detail, and they'll forward them on to the procurement subcommittee, who have that deeper dive and get that early engagement. So that's the way that transparency works. Beginning of the year, what procurements you're interested in, what have you got particular concerns about, and then there's a mechanism to look at those in more detail at that early period.
Thanks, Owen. Thank you. Councillor Allen?
Page 21, Corp 07R on page 21, almost the last line, the town centre delivery programme. There's a comment there, a board set up being reviewed. What's the situation there, do you know?
Yeah, turn my mic on. There's a number of boards or programs that considered Basildon Town Centre Regeneration Programme. So when we looked at it, they were considering the setup of how these boards work in terms of basically providing assurance on the delivery of the programme. So that it was felt not the appropriate time to basically conduct that review until the appropriate boards were in place. So we're going to come back and revisit that. So basically, yeah, they're just looking at the setup in terms of actually how the information is presented to the various boards around the programme itself.
Okay. Page 23, number 08R. 23. Where's 08R there? Oh yes, failure to manage the reputation of the council and borough in this critical friend role. What can you explain that?
In terms of a critical friend role, we're there to provide advice and guidance on particular matters. So it's not an audit as such. We're there to support the function in terms of development, new policy, new strategies. So we'll provide advice and guidance as required.
On to the council the summary, page 26, and the council tax cashable savings, are they out of
So which particular aspect are we looking at? Council tax savings? Yeah, and
the
council tax
cashable
reductions.
savings?
Yeah.
I just wonder how that came about.
Well, in terms of council tax, it's basically when we look at council tax, it's whether people are paying a council tax or not, and then putting the bills correct, and then basically collecting arrears for when the council tax should have been payable. So it's savings made in generating from basically looking at council tax cases and saying that person should have been paying council tax, they shouldn't have been getting single person discounts. So we look at council taxes, and our process is to say that council tax should be payable from that date. It needs to then be put in place and you to recoup any arrears or underpayment of council tax.
So, are we actually getting these arrears?
Yeah, a bill would be put in place. So basically, the individual would be written to with an explanation of the council tax payment due and collection arrears. So basically, they would get a council tax bill. Yes.
Yeah, but taking it further, do they actually pay? Because that seems to be another problem.
Well, yeah, that would then come down to the debt collection team in terms of basically going through the various mechanisms to ensure that that money's collected. So you get reminder letters, and if you don't eventually pay, you'll be taking summings and then go to to civil action will be taken.
Yeah, so when you've identified it as a fraud, basically, it goes to another department to try and collect the savings.
Yeah, once we've undertaken our piece of work in terms of investigation and identifying the council tax is now liable, we then pass it back to the revenues and benefits team, who then raise a council tax bill, and if it doesn't get paid, then falls onto the debt collection side of the function to collect the money. So we claim the saving. Whether it ultimately ends up being collected is a completely different question. Yes.
And the similar to the housing tenancy and housing solutions on that page, there's some big numbers there, 66 and 50,000. How does that?
So in terms of housing, we make calculations or estimates on basically if someone's put in temporary accommodation because they can't get a council property, we do a calculation in terms of how long they're in temporary accommodation, how much additional cost is being incurred by the council because they haven't been able to actually be put in their own council property. So most of these calculations around housing tenancy and housing solutions is the additional cost incurred by the council because they couldn't put them in a council property, which is where the work of our team is important because we get council properties back into circulation. So all this is about how much we're saving the council by not putting them in temporary accommodation, if that makes sense. Yeah, so that's why it's important for us as a team to get back as many fraudulent council properties that are let, to get those council properties back into circulation. So all this is guidelines provided by the central government in terms of how you produce these calculations. So it's a bit of looking at how much money's made in terms of putting them in temporary accommodation, and then we calculate a figure. It's the savings to the council.
Yeah, if we don't do anything, then it's going to cost the council money, and we're not using resources the best way. Yeah. So you can tell by the amount of cases that have been worked on across all bandings that there's a lot of work to do there, and I don't doubt if we doubled the team, you would get double the cases. So obviously the team is paying for itself, by what it's saving. So again, every time we have this, I will always say that they're doing an absolutely fantastic job, and we should be thankful for the team.
It might be an occasion where it plateaus out because obviously you hopefully through your action of the fraud team, fraud is reducing, and then we might come to you at some point in the future that you won't see any savings from us because there's no fraud out there. I don't imagine we'll ever get to that point in time that fraud doesn't exist. So the need to have a counter fraud team is imperative, but hopefully through our actions, fraud will reduce. But
Yeah, and every year we're hitting around 1.2 million, I think, northward. So there's a lot of money to be saved there, and it's a significant amount of money. So over the years, or certainly over the last 3 years, it's a significant saving to the public for protecting the public assets basically. So I think I'll finish up on a couple of items. So on page 25, we talk about the number of recommendations outstanding. So that seems low compared to 2 or 3 years ago. So are we near completion on a number of audits that's going to push that number back up again, or are we not finding as many recommendations when you're doing your audits?
It's difficult to predict the number of recommendations you ever get in any one year. It depends on the nature of the audit work you undertake. So you can't put a figure on it in effect. It depends on the nature of work, and actually, it goes up and down. It's peaks and troughs. I mean, managers are continuing implementing recommendation. So it depends on the cut-off point for reporting purposes. It may be quite high at one point, and then next week, 2 weeks later, because managers had the time to go onto Pentana, update it, it then goes down. So it's a changing figure. It's never static. So because it's I suppose a system that people can go onto the system at any point in time and update, it continually shifts and moves. So I could report to you like now it's this figure, tomorrow it's a changing figure. But in terms of increasing recommendations, it depends on the nature of work and what we find. But I can't predict the number of recommendations in effect.
In any case, it's good to see the recommendations lower and less of a percentage outstanding. So yeah, it's all good work. So on page 21, I just after an update on the discussions for arranging the scheme of delegation audit.
Yeah, we're in the planning phases of that audit at the moment. I had a conversation with the Director for Governance and Strategy, and we've scoped out a piece of work for scheme of delegation. So essentially, it's going to be a compliance piece of work, looking backwards in terms of actually what does this scheme of delegation look like now, and have we complied with it. So that's a piece of work I'm hoping to complete by year end, by March. It's in the planning stages, so I think we basically just agreed to terms of reference for it. It's now about finding an individual to undertake that work. They're all busy at the moment with other audits, but it's hoped that we will complete that piece of work by March.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Any other questions out there? David?
Thank you, Chair. Just a small point on Appendix B, please, if I may. The schedule shows that we recalled the progress back to 2019-20. And during that year, there were a number of issues raised, of which approximately 20% are still outstanding. All this audit work has been done, a lot of resources put to it. Just wonder, is it really worth showing that age of debt, for want of a better phrase, in audit collection when 20% of it has not been enacted upon and no response from the responsible people? Mike?
Yeah, I mean, we're in constant dialogue with managers in terms of whether the recommendations raised perhaps like 2 or 3 years ago are still valid. And it's hoped that that dialogue would mean actually some recommendations might disappear because they're now being overtaken by new events. But we are reminding managers constantly, you've got these recommendations outstanding from 2 or 3 years ago. Are they still valid, still current? Do you still want those recommendations? Should we be actually coming up with a new recommendation? So those conversations are had. Some of those could relate to long lead-in times. It could be relating to a new IT system, which is now no longer a priority because the priorities changes of the council in terms of what's priority day changes tomorrow. So it may be a case that we're waiting for a new system to come on stream, and therefore that's not quite happened yet. But there is a review process for all those recommendations, and because we have a Pentana management system, directors and managers can see all those recommendations on the system. So I would hope that if they're no longer valid, because they don't want to spend all the time wasting time updating the system, they would come to me and go, Mike, I think you should remove that from the system. It's no longer valid. Because of obviously to keep going for recommendations is a chore in itself. So if they're no longer valid, then they should come and to me and say it's been taken over events, and we'll have a conversation about is there a new recommendation to be had or not.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Allen?
Yeah, on page 27, the procurement, there's a triage form. What is the triage form?
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, they're introducing a new triage form, so essentially to basically prioritise requests for help, procurement are introduced this triage form, so then they can basically assess the prioritisation of that request. So basically any request for help goes through to them. They use this form now to basically triage it to say how important is that piece of work, how fast do we need to get back to that service department on that request for help. So it's a new initiative put forward in terms of triage forwards, so they can manage the request for help and they can assign a weighting or priority to that request.
Why are assurance levels not applicable?
Where's no assurance? It's because we haven't actually done an audit in effect, or it's a consultancy piece of work. So only when it's a true audit, where we looked at controls, will we provide an assurance opinion. So some work doesn't warrant an assurance rating because it's not an audit in a true sense.
And page 29. This is my personal interest here. Members' inquiries is red for assurance, and there's recommended 12 and number implemented was 11. So it looked as if there was a limited assurance on that.
It was a limited assurance piece of work. There's only one recommendation still to be implemented. So basically, there's no major concerns in that area.
No major concerns.
Yeah, I mean, there's only we'll see one recommendation outstanding in relation to that piece of work, and that's the low priority recommendation by the table. Reason why you get a red on there is essentially you've got one recommendation, so it's outstanding. So 100% of the recommendations are outstanding and overdue. So.
Okay, thanks everyone. So we'll turn to page 15 for the recommendation, and the recommendation is that the contents of the report be received and noted, which it duly has. So that moves us on to item 6, which is the capital and the investment strategy. So if I ask Mr. Lartman to introduce.
Hello, yes, thank you. So we are on page 39. So this is the draft capital investment strategy for 24-25. Just to let members know what will happen after this committee. This will go to Cabinet on the 8th of February. The Cabinet agenda was published about half an hour before this meeting started. So if this committee has any comments or observations, I will pass those on to the Cabinet member for resources to take them into account when he presents the strategy to Cabinet on the 8th of February. And then Cabinet will, or won't, but let's say will, then recommend that the capital investment strategy is recommended to Council for approval on the 22nd of February, along with the budget. It forms part of the budget papers. The report is set out in usual format. It meets all the requirements of statutory guidance, best practice. Can't think of any other word to describe it. It meets all of those. It starts off, so if we go to page 54 and page 56, page 54 and 56 sets out the 54 is the proposed general fund capital programme for the next 4 years. And page 56 is the proposed HRA capital programme for the next 4 years. clearly because the borrowing requirements of the council are driven by their capital programme. So that's where it starts. It starts with the capital programme. Just to note that those capital programmes themselves are subject to approval by Cabinet and by Council. So there is a chance, I guess, that they may change, in which case this strategy would have to be tweaked somewhat. The strategy provides for the Council's continuing investment in Sempre Homes Limited, and the Sempre Homes requirements are as set out in the business plan, Sempre business plan, that was approved by the Sempre board and then subsequently by Cabinet in December 2023. So that it reflects the up-to-date requirements of Sempre Homes Limited and its delivery of housing. Page 59 covers the commercial investments. Just to say that there's no new activity reflected in here and there's no new activity planned because, as you all know, because I've told you before, we're not allowed to do any of that anymore. I would just point out that also on page 59 is Councillor Cannam's favourite table, which shows the performance of the commercial assets. But I will actually come back to that table because that performance is affected by a change in MRP requirements. Page 62 sets out the policy and criteria for where we're dealing with cash investments or treasury investments. There's been no changes to our approach there. Counterparty limits and criteria for selecting counterparties, etc., remain the same. We haven't changed any of those. If we then move on to page 69, 69 covers covers the debt position of the council. I would draw your attention to the table on page 70. I've written 74, but I think I meant 71. No, I did mean 74. The table on page 74, you will note that the table at the top of page 74, you will note that we are planning by March 25 to have a greater proportion of our borrowing as short-term borrowing than we currently have. There are four reasons for that, essentially. First of all, going back to our commercial assets, part of the government's change in policy is that we should be considering, if appropriate, disposal of our commercial assets. The government doesn't want us to have commercial assets, even though they make a significant return to the council and support council services. Nevertheless, they say that we should consider at least once every 12 months whether it would be appropriate to dispose of them. That being the case, you don't want long-term debt associated with those commercial assets. You want it short, because otherwise you'd be disposing of assets and you'd have debt that actually cost you a fortune to get rid of. So we switched them into short-term. The Sempre business plan does provide for a dip in the council's investment in Sempre, I think in 25-26. So it makes sense to keep some of that short as well. You don't want long-term debt there. There is one investment loan outstanding which should be repaid by March this year. That's about £10–11 million. You don't want long-term debt associated with that either. And at the moment, the differential between short and long-term interest rates is quite small. So it seemed appropriate just to increase the amount of short-term borrowing at the moment. It never exceeds, over the next 3-4 years, it never exceeds more than 30% of the total debt. And of course, if you've got short-term debt that's maturing within 12 months, if it then becomes appropriate to actually, I need to switch the strategy, I need to switch it into long-term debt, that's relatively straightforward to do. Switching long-term debt into short-term debt is not easy at all. So that's why we've done that, positioned ourselves there. Then if I draw your attention to section 7, and I haven't noted the page number, so I think it's called MRP, so it's going to be page 86. So the government, as members will recall, there again, this is all connected to council's commercial investments, not this council, other councils having their fingers burned with commercial investments. And the government has tightened up, and they've tightened up the rails, and as I've already said, they've basically closed the door on it. We can't do it. The last bit of the jigsaw from Treasury's perspective was concerning minimum revenue provision, i.e. provision for the repayment of debt. And members may recall that our minimum revenue provision policy in respect of commercial assets was that we wouldn't make a minimum revenue provision provided the value of the assets was greater than the amount of borrowing that we'd taken out, to purchase those assets, on the basis that being the case, we could be assured that we could sell the properties and repay the loan. The government has, I'll try not to be too, anyway, in its wisdom, has decided that's not good enough, and has said that we must make an annual minimum revenue provision every year in respect of the money that was borrowed against those assets. Which, let's look at it positively. It's storing up value for the future, isn't it? Because if we're repaying that debt and they're going up in value, at some point we're going to get a real nice payday. The reality is that actually we don't want a payday in 20 years' time. We want the money to support services now. Nevertheless, we have to do what the government is requiring us to do. That's going to be a charge in next year of £531,000 to revenue, and that takes the return on our commercial assets from our target of 2%, which, if you go back to the table I had earlier, we were on target to meet. That takes our return down to just over 1%. So still worth having them. It's making a 1% return. It's making a contribution to services, but it's not where we would have wanted to be. But nevertheless, that's the way it is, and that's been accommodated for in the budget. So I think I'll stop there, and I can take any questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks. It's lovely to hear you explain that report and the depth and the of your knowledge and the pleasure you take from the report. Again, I was saying it's such a great document to read, and it outlines some of the investments being made by Basildon Borough Council, especially against the backdrop of a challenging financial environment. So it's a really good read to kind of understand what the council is doing. Page 9, where the officer mentioned it sets out some of the capital expenditure that we've got coming up. You can see that there's provision for play areas, town centre regeneration, and affordable housing in the borough. I think I'll just kick off with some questions. Just a general question. I think, Richard. I think the minimum revenue position is probably the major change in the strategy. But are there any other significant changes in the strategy since the previous approved one?
No, I think as I highlighted, I think that is the most significant forced change, if you like, change that we wouldn't have chosen to make. And I think that the only other significant change, as I pointed out, was increasing the amount of short-term borrowing, and hopefully the reasons I gave for explaining why we decided to do that makes sense to the committee. Everything else is pretty much as it was, given that we can't invest commercially. Debt for yield. We can't borrow to invest commercially. There's nothing. I was going to say there's nothing exciting. There's lots of exciting things in here, but there's nothing sort of interesting or slightly different. As regards our commercial activity, it's just running off stuff that we've already got.
Thank you, Richard. And just talking about the commercial investments, they are continuously in the news at the moment, where other councils seem to be suffering from investments that they've made, some to a vastly larger degree than what we have. But I think what we've done in Basildon Council and having a strategy as large and detailed as we do, is that we've shown that unfortunately we've shown the government that it can be done right, but unfortunately we're a small voice in the bigger backdrop of other areas that have gone wrong. So you can see in the detail there that we're forecasting an income stream of around 4 million from our investments, and that, as Richard said, that goes to supporting public services, and 4 million is quite a big contribution. So I mean, you did touch on it, and I remember reading a clause. I couldn't find it in here, but are there any provisions in the strategy that require the council to review the appropriateness of keeping the investments, rather than adding borrowing or finance? Is there any provision that we need to consider disposing when there's a requirement for more funding?
The guidance says that I might have to come back to you to be specific about it, but the guidance in general says that the government doesn't want local authorities to have debt for yield assets, which is what these are. Yeah, we borrowed it. It doesn't want that, and therefore it says that periodically the council should review the appropriateness, of continuing to hold these assets. I think it does also, I think you're right, Councillor, it does also say that if you, when you are considering reborrowing or refinancing, one should consider that. Unfortunately for the government, that's based on a complete misunderstanding of the way that we manage our debt. We don't manage our debt, we don't hypothecate debt to assets. We have a capital financing requirement. We need £600 million. And we borrow within that or up to that. We don't say that loan there that we took out on the 5th of August 2023 is because of the Bath property or because of the Nottingham property. At the moment, we have discussed from time to time with because clearly we have advisors still, so we've switched from DTZ to AY now, so we still have advisors on these things. We have had conversations from time to time about, okay, when would be a good time to sell? We haven't had that conversation recently, but the last one I had was, well, not now. It is basically the answer. And I think it's not now from two reasons. One is that my understanding is that the property market is still not recovered from COVID, and equally they are generating money to support services. Why would it be appropriate to dispose of it and create an even bigger revenue problem than we've actually got at the moment?
Yeah, that in the news, I think yesterday, late in the news, I don't know how confirmed it is, but the Department of Levelling Up was considering forcing councils to dispose of assets to support running costs. And immediately I thought, well, do they actually understand how we're operating? Because we've got those investments that are supporting our running costs, and if we do dispose of them, then we lose the income stream. So, Owen.
I think that disposal tactic is a general thing when councils get into financial trouble. It's about disposing of assets to try and meet some of those short-term gaps. That's sort of one of the tools they use when you have commissioners who are appointed. So it's not a general thing, but it's one of the tools they sort of recommend if an authority gets into trouble. And that obviously gives a little bit of short-term respite until they can get financial plans in place.
Richard.
If I may, the government is talking about, as Owen's just said, allowing local authorities to sell assets and to use those assets to support services. It's called capital flexibilities. I've worked in local government for 21, 22 years, and before that I worked in other sectors. And I think pretty much everybody knows, yeah, that you shouldn't use proceeds from asset disposals to keep your business going. You know, if you're doing that, and I think there's and it has a real tension with some of the other, as you've just pointed out, Councillor, of some of the other stuff that we're trying to do. And I really do think that they don't understand.
Yeah, it's heartening to know that it's a general thing rather than not a general thing, I should say, and more specific to councils that may have failed. But certainly, if a consultation does come out, or if we get a chance to consult on that, on anything like that, then we need to jump on that, and I'll happily put my pennyworth in as well. So I'll open it up to further questions then before I carry on. So, Councillor Kerr-Neeson.
Thank you. Yeah, I've just got some queries on page 56 actually. I was just wondering what the Safe and Sound Estates budget is, 1.8 million over the next 4 years. What do we know what that's actually being spent on?
Specifically, I haven't have that information to hand, but presumably you will know that the administration has a programme of safe and sound estates, and it envisages investing. I think originally the thinking was that it would invest in 2 estates a year, yeah, to lift them up environmentally, etc., etc. Where that programme has actually got to, I do know there's been some delay in bringing that programme forward, but I equally know that officers are trying to reinvigorate it. But in terms of specifically what it will be spent on, I couldn't give you that information.
Yeah, the reason I'm asking is obviously we've got some Safe and Sound Estates money coming out of the general fund, and then we've got this 1.8 coming out of the HRA. And given the balance of owner-occupied and privately rented properties that we have on our estates, given as opposed to council properties, I just can't understand why we're using that amount of money out of our HRA.
The split between HRA and general fund costs, as I understand it, was done on tenure on our estates. So they looked at the tenure of the properties and said, in general, on our estates, I can't remember what the exact figures are, but those figures represent that balance.
Yeah, I know. Well, as I say, I maybe need to look into that with a bit more, because certainly I know on 5 Links, very few of the properties are actually now council tenanted. We've got Swan Housing, we've got private tenants, we've got owner-occupiers, and we've got some temporary property there, but as I say, I'm not aware of a great deal of council tenants there. The next one is the Brookhouse money. We've got 5.6 in 24-25 and 7.4 in 25-26. Do we know what that 5.4 is being spent on? Because my understanding is it's going to take 2 years to decant from Brookhouse. So we won't, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we won't be able to start any work until it's decanted. So therefore, shouldn't it appear in 25-26 and 26-27 budgets?
Richard.
So in total, there's
Sorry.
So in total, there's actually 16 million provided for Brookhouse. There's 5 million this year, and there's that 11 million there. That allocation was based on initial estimates of when the money would be spent. Yeah, it's an allocation for a programme, so it will be moved between years as necessary.
Yeah. Finally, the new build and acquisition. Obviously, we've got 5.4 and then 3, 6, 10 and 10 million pounds on new build and acquisition. I understand that interest rates are high at the moment, are likely to go down, but not by that much. it just seems that given that property prices are more likely to rise, building costs are more likely to rise, we should be looking to turn that round and actually have that higher spend, and given our council waiting list as well, you know, which is not insignificant, we desperately need to sort of provide those homes, and I just don't understand why that's this way round.
I would say I'll just bring Richard in, but I was going to ask a question about Brook House and how we've accommodated the spend on there. Obviously, you're dealing with a budget, and you're going to have only a finite resource, so you're going to have to swap around you know, what you spend money on to accommodate such an exceptional spend. But I'll let Richard come in on that one.
Yeah, thanks. So in order to accommodate £11 million additional unexpected expend on Brook House, we had to find the resource from somewhere. And the resource came from the new building acquisition programme. That was the only place that it could have come from. I did, you will, said the Cabinet agenda has been published. There's more information, you know, you have a look at that. I did model other ways of doing it. I do understand the need to build houses and to acquire houses, even with interest rates as they are and perhaps falling. If you increase that new building acquisition programme, either in the later years or in the early years, you start to break the HRA, because the issue is that, as you'll understand, that we're only going to let these for social rent. If you're letting them for social rent, you can't make it wash its face. Yeah, if you're borrowing, you just can't make it wash its face. It's never going to break even. That's almost a definition of social housing, isn't it? But it's a reality. You know, when you're trying to fit that into a 4, 5, 30-year business plan, it just doesn't work. But yeah, I would say have a look at the Cabinet agenda because it goes into a little bit more detail about the background on the HRA.
Yeah, I think just adding on to that, I think what we've got remember what we're trying to do here is to make sure the finances and the strategy is prudent and sensible. We could all, you know, we obviously want to provide as much as we can, but we have to operate within constraints, and I think you know, all credit to the officers that they've accommodated such an exceptional item as Brook House and the value of it. They've accommodated that and kept up to some degree the other programs that are in operation as well. So I mean, that is the resilience of Basildon Council, which the officers have left Basildon Council in that position, that they are able to accommodate this and still carry on some of the programs that we would normally do, albeit not to the same degree. So I mean, you know, we need to say, you know, Basildon Council is in a good state and has done a good job to be able to you know, provide a degree of everything. So I think everyone can be you know, should be applauded for that work. Is any more questions from you, Councillor? So the next councillor we have is Councillor Robbins.
Yeah, my concern is the cinema.
Yeah.
And how much it's costing. And I understand there's over £300,000 owed to us in some kind of rent or lease, whatever. But we are now going to have to be creditors. And the £60,000 a month, I mean, how are we coping with it? Where's the money coming from? Because as the way I see it, in security alone, it's £240,000 so far.
If we bring in Owen to answer that one.
Yes, right, okay.
So a lot of those costs are actually revenue costs, and they're picked up in a bit more detail in the Cabinet agenda that's just been published. So this deals just with the capital allocation, but rent, security costs, that's on a revenue side, and that's picked up in the Cabinet agenda that's been published. You'll be able to see a bit more detail of it in there.
Yeah, so it tells us where it's coming from, does it?
Yeah.
Yeah, right, okay.
Just latching on to the back of that, the 1.1 million that's in there on page 9, is that capital expense that we're going to use to encourage a new occupant?
your page 61, you've got a couple of tables there. Additional debt from commercial activities and income from commercial activities. So what are those acquisitions and lease investments? Are they what's all on the previous pages?
Yeah. So the direct asset acquisitions are the properties that we purchased in, for example, Richmond, Stevenage, etc. And then the lease investments are the leasing deals that we did. If you remember, there's the Dixon Hotel in London, there's a Tesco's in Corby, and there's a Travel Lodge. Yeah, in Newton Causeway. Yeah.
So that's on page. So they're on previous pages.
Yeah.
And then the income from all those comes up to nearly 4 million.
Mm-hmm.
So that's quite a good deal then, really. But what I was concerned about was in page 79, middle of the page, it's got a 10% reduction in property values, would generate an annual charge to revenue. So I couldn't see how a reduction in property values brought in a revenue charge, because the property's still there and you're still getting the income.
Comes back to the MRP position that I was talking about. So if your property values dropped below your initial borrowing, then you would have to make a charge to revenue in order to meet that, which would have reduced your net income. So your gross income would stay the same, but your net income would be lower, because you'd have a charge that you'd have to meet out of that gross income.
The property's still there, bringing income in.
That's what we were discussing a bit earlier, really, about it's a bit notional.
Yeah, I think what it is obviously the value's dropping, and you have to recognise that you've got that risk there. So the what's actually happening in the physical world, the transactions are still happening, but on paper, your asset is not worth as much as what what it once was. So
you can't clear the debt by selling it.
You're recognising that loss in income, that loss in value.
So to put it another way, if the asset was worth £100 and you were getting £100 income from it, and the asset fell to £90 in value, you'd have to recognise that £10 drop in your accounts, and you'd offset that against your income, and so your net income becomes £90.
have you got any more questions, Councillor?
Yeah, I've got one. 74. 74 HRA lends to the general fund. Where's that? How's that come about then? Paragraph 3. The HRA is always fully borrowed and lends to the general fund.
It can go either way. So I need a chart. I need to be able to write this up on it. So we have our capital financing requirement, which is a measure of how much debt the council could carry if it chose to. And that capital financing requirement is divided into two elements. Yeah, there's a general fund element, there's an HRA element. Yeah, and depending on the actual borrowing, we allocate against those elements. So, for example, if the HRA is fully borrowed, yeah, so it's borrowed up to the total of its CFR, the HRA still has reserves, yeah, which is cash. So what's happening to that cash? Well, the general fund's using that cash. So the HRA is effectively lending that cash to the general fund, and the general fund pays the HRA interest. on that cash. It can work the other way around as well, depending on the cash flows.
So they're not actually independent accounts, really?
They are. The HRA is a ring-fenced account. Yeah, it's a landlord account. Yeah, but it has cash surpluses in its reserves, which it is lending to the general fund, and the ring fence is maintained because the general fund pays the HRA interest.
Yeah, it's just using our liquid funds to the best of our ability. You don't want to leave cash or reserves there just depreciating if you can use it to invest and get a small income. Any further questions out there? No? Okay. I guess just one last one from me, Richard. I'll just note on page 54, the service investments, the general fund. We've got a 4,000 investment or capital expenditure there for temporary accommodation. Is that to try and alleviate the issues we're having with homelessness?
Yes, it is 4 million, Councillor, not 4,000. So there's been £500. You've got me at it now. There's been 500,000 put in this year, 4 million next year, 500,000 the year after, and the intention is that funding is used to purchase or otherwise increase the provision of temporary accommodation within the borough, thus hopefully alleviating the financial pressure that we're feeling from homelessness.
Thank you, Richard. So that we can take heart in there that there's a good item there of social value that will try and alleviate a lot of the problems that the borough is having. So it's good to see that is planned for next year. Okay, so I think the very, very last thing for me is on page. Sorry, I did have it. Page 59. And we see the commercial investments table. That is my favourite table because the first two investments, I was involved in the purchase of those two investments through the commercial asset strategy acquisition committee back then. So it's always nice for me to see how well they're performing. So I thank Richard for putting that table in there. Okay, so with that said, a huge thank you for that report. I'm sure I haven't done it justice that it deserves for the amount of content that's in there. So I will carry on reading that report. So if we now turn to page 40 for the recommendations. So the recommendation is that the committee endorses the draft capital investment strategy for consideration by Cabinet and subsequently for approval by full council. Yeah, so all those four? Yeah, so that's unanimous. Thank you. So that's that item. So the next one is the work programme. I think a lot of the work programme that we've got is still to be confirmed pending the audit work that's going on. So there's not too many updates on that. So any update from?
No, that's it, that's correct. So various dates of items are due to change just due to external audit problems, but other than that, there's nothing else.
Okay, thank you. So that work programme is noted, and that brings the committee to conclusion. So thanks everyone for their attendance. Thank you.